Thanks for letting me be here today. And I'm pretty passionate about what we're going to talk about, but I absolutely like it to be as open as possible. It's humbling to be any part of Yale, to be honest. It's been an honor. I'm in my 4th semester now teaching here, and I love it. And it is humbling to be at the School of Management. And every once in a while I get invited to talk to groups that are smarter than I am and more accomplished than I am, and it's a little bit frightening. I got invited last spring to go over to Oxford and talk, and they took me in the political union. And before they take you in, they've got a photograph back from 100 years ago of Teddy Roosevelt speaking right where I was about to speak. And it, that puts me in my place. And I got in there and I start to give my pitch, and I'm being as good as I can, except for one person, like front and center, who is just dead asleep. And if you've ever done that before, it's really unnerving, because you're trying to do it, and this person is just like that, and you want to slap them, but you try not to notice them. And then at the end of the speech, when I stopped it, I asked my wife if she would stay awake in the next time I spoke. So she's not here this morning on purpose. Pretty humbling there too, though. So anyway, what I talk about and what we're going to talk about today is something I feel very strongly about. It's really leadership. There's management in it, but I don't think you can separate the two. And so as we look at this, we're going to talk a little bit about this theory. A lot of people will tell you that right now. You got a political campaign. People are saying America does not lead very well in the world, in business, you name it. If you believe that, whether you do or don't, you got to believe that one. Americans don't do it very well. American leaders are not very effective anymore. And you can certainly make that argument. And there are a lot of things that might buttress that argument. Things which have come up which maybe we haven't handled as effectively as we wish we had. Maybe our leaders haven't been the brilliant or decisive or whatever it is we wanted them to do. They haven't done that. So here's the question, why? And the first thing you ask is, do people care anymore? Are they not as smart as they used to be? Are they not patriotic? Are they not focused? What's the problem? And I'll tell you what, the problem in my view is that we started to learn leadership and management over many years, and it worked. We were very effective in many areas. But then in fact, those things that we learned, you might say legacy practices, cultures, that sort of thing, the ground changed underneath our feet. And suddenly, things about the world, like competition, changed dramatically, because as my friend Tom Friedman has put out, it's a much flatter place and much more competitive now. You're competing with people who didn't know you existed before, and they're hungry. And things happen a lot faster. You can't operate at the same speed where things come into the front office, sit in the inbox, and you wait, because it's going to come and go before you're ready to deal with it. And then complexity. It's a lot more complex in every way. And then, of course, you could argue we have less disciplined societies and structures. Whether that's good or bad, we do. It's much less easy to get organizations to line up and do what it is you want them to do. There's positives to that, but I think what that's done is it's created an environment where people had done things that were very comfortable through their whole lives and had been raised with things that worked, and suddenly they didn't work anymore. And they're wondering why that leadership and those processes and the building we created 50 years ago, the structure of it isn't right for how we operate today. It's very frustrating. And so you have a leadership gap. Now, I lived through this in a different venue, in a different experience. I want to tell you about it, because this is sort of where I became passionate about this. And for me, it began back in April of 1980. I was a young Special Forces lieutenant, a Green Beret lieutenant in Thailand. And I'm doing my thing with the Thais. Then, thousands of miles away in the deserts of Iran, something happened that changed the rest of my life, and I didn't even know it was going to do that. And for those of you who remember, we had the failure of an operation called Eagle Claw, and that was President Carter's bold attempt to rescue American citizens who were being held hostage in the American embassy in Tehran. A lot of politics behind it, but there was an attempt to mount a commando raid that would successfully rescue them. It failed. It failed in a place where they were transloading from fixed wing or C-130 or aircraft to MH-53 helicopters. There were no Iranian forces around. It wasn't a firefight. It was in the dark. They had maintenance problems with some helicopters, and then eventually they had a collision between a helicopter and a C-130. And what happened was 8 Americans died, And we left on the ground in Iran and had to pull the force back out. We left 8 dead bodies, we left burned equipment, and the Iranians were able to put it on TV and say, look, the Americans came into our sovereign country and they made fools of themselves. And if you go back to 1980, as I can remember, it was not long after the failure of Vietnam. It was also not long after the Israelis in 1976 had rescued their citizens from Entebbe. They had gone in and did a dramatic rescue and had been successful. Now American special operating forces had been called to go do something complex and difficult and made it look impossible. We looked feckless. And it had an extraordinary effect on the force. I would argue that had we succeeded, it would have been the worst thing that could have happened, because the status quo would have been reinforced as, okay, we're good enough. And instead, what happened was the force came away with a decision, never again. And for the rest of my career, and I spent most of my career in the counterterrorist forces that were born from this, we said we'll never be called and failed. And what you saw with the success of the UBL raid and a number of other things, that all came from that decision to build and that force to be the way they are. So what happened was we formed some forces. We formed the Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, the Rangers, that sort of thing. We formed a number of very elite forces which were needed. We started to adapt to new requirements in the world. They were world-class. They were unbelievable, best in the world pretty quickly. They were successful through a number of things. But they were also stovepiped. Each of them, when you get a very good organization, it has a tendency to be cohesive. It also has a tendency to become tribal. And when you are so cohesive you're tribal, you start to think nobody's quite as good as I am, and so why should I coordinate or deal with other elements? Because I'm that special. I'm a Yale graduate. And so what we did was we had a series of extraordinary organizations, but they really weren't what we needed, a team of teams. So they stood up an organization called the Joint Special Operations Command, and it was effective. It was designed to pull all those teams together. And it was remarkably effective, but it was pretty narrowly focused. It was designed to do hostage rescue, do certain very specialized missions that would be periodically required. So you do a lot of plan and focus, you do this magical mission, and then you come back and do it. It was a pretty good organization. But then times changed. That was good until about 2001. Actually, the rise of Al-Qaeda highlighted the change. Now, a lot of people think the rise of Al-Qaeda started on 9/11. Al-Qaeda declared war on the United States in 1996. Most Americans didn't even realize that. Many don't know now. But what happened was you had a different situation in the world. You had an opposition that was culturally difficult to understand. It was a different religion, it was a different culture, different languages, lots of things, and we had a difficult time realizing what it was. It was unlike some of the more familiar, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, Black September, the ones that had been in the 70s and early 80s were understandable and familiar. This was different. It was also geographically dispersed around the world. And it was an insurgency, more of a political insurgency than a religiously based terrorist organization. And it was tough to understand that as well. It also changed. It changed all the time. It's like your business competition. Just when you think you understand them and you build this great plan to outcompete them, the thing is different. And it operated differently. Back in the 1970s and 1980s, when aircraft hijacking became popular, an aircraft would be hijacked, hijackers would make demands, and those demands would usually be for the release of prisoners or money, and it was designed to get them a higher profile. Now we were dealing with people who blew up the airplane, killed the people, destroyed, and didn't ask for anything. They just said, how do you like that? The world's changed. Or they made the kinds of demands which couldn't even be thought of. We want every Westerner out of the Mideast. But the idea was they were making it to the point where, what do you do about it? And so we had a completely different situation, very similar to what we find in leadership and business and politics. We had a capability gap. We had a very effective model and organization and culture that had worked well, and suddenly we had a much bigger problem than we had been designed to deal with, and we were culturally ready to deal with. So how do you fix it? We knew we had to get outside this narrow organization. We had to bring all of the different capacities of the government, our allies, and everybody else together to deal with a problem that was so different than we dealt before. And so you identify all these organizations and you say, all right, this is pretty easy. We'll just bring them all into one organization. Everyone will cooperate and share information and problem solved. Has anyone ever seen that happen? And if anyone ever does see it happen, you'll see a unicorn parked out front. So here's where we were. We had to make that happen. And my force, at this point I was commanding Joint Special Operations Command. I commanded it from 2003 to 2008. Suddenly we had to make this work, but we had some unique things. First, we brought in all these elements, but I wasn't in command. I was in command of the people who belonged to me organizationally. All the rest of the contributions and participants were there basically voluntarily. Their organization sent them. I didn't command them. I couldn't tell them to go left, right, up, or down, or anything else. I didn't have statutory mandate. I couldn't raise their pay, lower their pay. I couldn't fire them. I couldn't do any of that stuff that normally is associated with managing or motivating people, particularly when you're putting them in harm's way. So I had to lead by influence. We had to lead by influence. My organization now, if you think historically in the military, you think of great generals who say they don't lead by influence, they lead by command. They stand up and they go, everybody charge, everybody go this way. Well, it's never been that way. When you're in combat, people do what they want to do. And they do it because they believe in you or they don't. But in a case like this, you've got to get people to want to do things because they think it's right and they think it's in their interest. You can't direct anybody to do anything. And so what we did was we came upon the requirement to create something called shared consciousness and purpose. That is the Holy Grail of what we needed to be effective. And I'll take you through that because at the end of the day, it's about winning. It's about winning the war. It's about winning your business competition. It's about winning your political. It's whatever it is. You're in it because you want a successful outcome. Now, winning doesn't mean you destroy your enemy. It may be winning, may be educating kids. I was down at the Harlem Success Academy a couple weeks ago. Extraordinary levels of success. That's winning. And for winning, it's about results. You've got to decide what the right results are for your organization and focus on them. For us, we had to prevent al-Qaeda attacks on ourselves and our allies. We had to degrade al-Qaeda en route to destroying them, because we knew it was going to take generations to destroy the movement, and the idea actually to out-argue it. But we also had to expand this counterterrorism capability in the midst of the fight. So we had to build the organization and we had to use it at the same time, and that's hard. And if you look at just one thing, this was in Iraq, the last two. In August of 2004, my organization did 18 raids in a month. And these are actual raids. 2 years later, in Iraq, same force did 300. And as I always joke with my SEALs, that's 10 a night. If you think about that kind of pace, an organization which was doing something every few nights, or when I was younger, every few months, it's not doing 10 a night. And you have to do that to be effective. Entirely different leadership problem, entirely different management problem. And you have to be effective. You have to be on the right target at the right time in every case. So your quality has got to be as good or better than ever. So as you scale, you can't lose any of the absolute precision and world-class effectiveness, or people die, or people who aren't supposed to be killed could be harmed. And over time, extraordinary levels of success. And it became expected by our policymakers. But we had to be efficient, and this was something entirely different too. It had to be scalable. So suddenly you're taking something that was one way, and it has to be scalable to an entirely different level. And this was October 2007. That is significant al-Qaeda in Iraq leaders killed or captured in 1 month. And that was a grim month. But it gives you a sense of the pace of that fight at that point. So here you are. The solution was pretty easy to come upon. You have to do something faster and more precise than anyone in history has ever done it before, at a pace you never even contemplated. So how are you going to do that? What do you normally do? The first thing we do is we try to do what we already do better. If your grades aren't good enough, what do most people do? I'm going to study harder. And when you're about 20 hours a day, you suddenly say there's no more room to study. We couldn't fly faster, we couldn't shoot straighter, we corrected a lot of things. You can make the assembly line a certain amount better, and then at a certain point you're at physics. And we couldn't get beyond it. And we were doing everything as well as anyone had ever done it. And then we backed into this. And for military guys to back into this as the answer was absolutely counterintuitive, because typically if you'd put this up when we started, when I took command, okay, you're going to get this by a red ball with shared consciousness and purpose, they'd have carried me out in a straitjacket. Because I'm dealing with big knuckle commandos who, they want to get after it. But then they started to understand that is the key, understand it. It's figuring it out. It's not being able to shoot better. A lot of people can shoot. Not many organizations can understand and communicate effectively. That becomes your difference. So we came up with this, and of course the answer there is, yeah, of course that's the answer. But then, as my guys asked, got it, what is that? And what do we think it is? This is what I think it is. I think everybody has access to all the information. They don't have the same conclusions necessarily, because you want the wisdom of different people. But you want everybody to deal with as much information as they can so that they enrich the discussion. And then, of course, you want everybody to have common ownership for a clearly understood mission. And this is key. If you are doing something for somebody, if somebody sends you out there and says, dig a hole, dig it 6 feet wide, 6 feet deep, you'll go out there and dig the hole. And you may not do that good a job because you don't know what it's for and you pretty much don't care. But if you are part of an organization doing something greater, you might have a different approach to it. And you also may, if someone tells you why you're digging the hole, and you say, what are you trying to do? Well, we're trying to bury someone. But that dude's only 3 feet long, you may say, I can save time and money. Or if he's not 3 feet long, we'll cut him in half and save the time and money. But this is it. Your strength is in your people. It's not in the great leaders. Your strength is in the organization. It's the wisdom of the crowd. So the way we look at this, we've broken it down into 3 parts. There's a design part, there's an execute part, and there's a lead part, and they are not sequential, they are simultaneous. And it's not, as I'll point out, it's part management, but it's a lot more leadership. And we start this way. You define winning. Everybody says, okay, that's pretty easy. All right, tell me what winning is in Afghanistan. There's no common understanding. When I first went there in 2002, there wasn't a clear understanding of what winning is. When I commanded there in 2009 to 2010, there were 2 different mission statements, one from the U.S. and one from NATO, and I'm the U.S. commando and the NATO commander. I could pick. Well, the reality is I'm going to be wrong on both counts, no matter what I do. That's a problem. I was back there last month. Same problem. Unless you can get everyone understanding what winning really is, it's hard. And you can say, okay, winning is this amount of EBITDA. Okay, it might be it. But it's usually not that clear. And you've got to get everybody with an understanding of what winning actually is. The second thing is you've got to have a strategy to get to that winning. And you say, okay, that's pretty easy. But look at somewhere like Afghanistan. I had 46 coalition nations, all part of the organization. They all generally wanted a good outcome. But how to get there, 46 different opinions. Actually, more than that. And you have to get all of them focused in the same way. Now, this is pretty simple. You define the team. This is an organization doing a raid. You say, that's the team responsible for that raid. And who do you normally think's on your team? You think the people who wear the same suit as you and are paid by the same people, go to the same school, whatever it is that defines them. Maybe get the paycheck from the same place. But I would argue that's a very narrow view of what a team is. A team is really everyone responsible for getting something done, whatever it is. And it's usually much wider than it feels. A force on the ground there was absolutely dependent upon unmanned aerial vehicles, predators, medical support, fire support, communication support, intelligence support, all of these things from this network of people, many of whom have never met the people on the ground, but are just as important to the outcome of that as the people on the ground. And so how do you make everyone in that network feel like they're just as responsible? How do you make them feel good if we succeed, bad if we fail, completely bought in? How do you do that? particularly across organizational lines, where they might be part of, in a case we dealt with a lot, an intelligence organization, and the leader of that intelligence organization doesn't feel like his report card is graded based upon our success on the ground. So you have to change that. It's that definition of team. They have to be defined as part of the team, and they got to know it. And then, of course, you got to build a network. We had a saying that it takes a network to defeat a network, and you can build a network. And if I ask you what a network is, and you say, well, it's a cell phone system, I'd say, sorta. But it's not a network unless you actually communicate with people. A network is when you have the ability to communicate, to leverage relationships, and use them. So we had to build the backbone of a tremendous amount of IT all the way out to very, very remote locations. And then we had to put processes in that made it work. It's like having a human body. You've got to pump life through the body. So we did something fostering and forcing communications. This is Mike Bloomberg. That's how he runs New York City. That's the bullpen. Can't see him. He's right in the center. I was down there talking to him and saying, okay, where's your office, really? He goes, right there. He turned the old office into like a reception room. He sits there. I don't have an office now, and I didn't in Iraq and Afghanistan. I use a U-shaped table in a big open room about this size. And anybody who wants to talk to me, come talk to me. Because you can do things so much more quickly, and that's the way he operates. And then they put things to keep their awareness up on screens in front, what's happening in the city, and they communicate that way. It's really powerful. It's different from the old front office where you got to go through a receptionist and then another assistant. In the Pentagon, we had those, and we called them moat dragons. And their goal in life was to keep you and your information from the decision maker. Because decisions are so much easier when they're uncluttered with data. And there he is. Okay, discipline and prioritize the effort. A lot of people confuse a more open, transparent system with sort of something that might be more casual or loose, and it's absolutely not. In fact, we found it's extraordinarily not. We had a battle rhythm where we did everything through the day. It was like the heartbeat of a force. It was like CPR in the organization, a series of meetings, a series of ways we communicated, enforcing functions. I found out that I'm really lazy. But what I did is if I had a calendar and a schedule that forced me to do things, I would do them. If they were on there, and if at 10 o'clock I'm supposed to do this, and I decided every week on Tuesday at 10 o'clock I'm going to do this, I decide it when I'm not tired, and I do this very ambitious schedule, which I'd never do if I didn't have it. But once I've got it, I do it. And the organization we found was the same way. And you've got this drumbeat that forces the organization to work. Maybe an iron lung or something that keeps someone, but it forces. And we had a priority system where we prioritized what we had to accomplish. We put time against it, and then when we ran out of time, we stopped doing priorities. We said everything below this just doesn't get prioritized. And look how often leaders will just say what's important, and then you look at their calendar, and where did they actually spend their time? They spent their time fielding ground balls that people threw at them that didn't really contribute to what they're trying to do. The most important thing of this whole thing is relationships. This is a picture of two guys who forged a relationship that shouldn't have been able to do that. Mandela and de Klerk in South Africa. Both of them had organizations who didn't want their leaders to pull toward accommodation. And yet, courageously, both of them knew if they didn't form a personal bond, not a close friendship, they're not hanging out in the sports bars together, but if they didn't form a relationship, they couldn't pull the African National Congress and the government together. And they did that. And that takes courage. And that takes stick-to-it persistence. And then leadership. You know, you can set up all this stuff and you can say, I'm going to do this great organization. It's going to run itself. I have never seen one that runs itself. Not a good one. Leaders run it. Not one leader, lots of leaders run it. If you look at the one that I admire, it's the American Civil Rights Movement. Extraordinary strategy. The ability and willingness to do a nonviolent movement is amazing. It's almost unprecedented. There have been about 2 of them that have actually worked. The ability to push social change through a nonviolent strategy took strategy, it took strategic communications, it took discipline, it took all these things. It also took leadership. I would argue without inspirational leadership of people like Martin Luther King, it wouldn't have worked. It would have just been a strategy. And so leaders become more important than ever. And you got to learn. If you don't learn, because we talk about change, a couple of things that happen. In the military, you can get killed. If you're at Lehman Brothers, you can be carrying your stuff out in a cardboard box. So you're either going to learn and adapt from it, or you're going to pay a price. So it came down to this, and when we came upon shared consciousness and purpose, it really did surprise us. We started working this, and we started doing more of it. And then we started getting reinforced for the positive behavior. And then suddenly, that became the center of how we operated. That became the goal of what we did. We knew that the better we communicated, the better we led, the more effective we'd be. More effective than any other single change we could make in the organization. But here's the deal. It's culture change. And people throw that out a lot. And people say, well, we're going to go into the organization, we're going to change the culture. And if you've not ever tried to do that, it's incredibly difficult. Because you're changing people who've been reinforced in what they do. They've been successful, particularly if they're more senior. Because if you're more senior, when the war started in 2001, I was a 46-year-old brigadier general. Now, it's about 25 years of service. Everything I'd done to be a brigadier general in the Army, you've been pretty successful. So the last thing you want to do is rock the boat because, man, I got here this far. I'm not going to screw anything up because, life's good. But everything I had learned, the basics were solid, but so much had to change. Suddenly I had to change, and I'm risking the success I have. If I was 22 and I hadn't had any success, change, yeah, why not? If you're 46, that's very different. And you're going to go into organizations where they got a lot of 46-year-old people. The last thing they want to do is have change because it's threatening. And it's threatening to organizations writ large. So change is something that leaders have got to do through a lot of ways. One, they got to do it through personal example. I have never seen culture change when you delegate it. I've never seen you say, we are going to change the way this organization operates, change, and then report to me in the front office. If the leader doesn't live it and exhibit it every hour of every day, it doesn't work. I stayed deployed for almost 5 years. Very popular with my wife. Because I couldn't do it otherwise. As soon as I stepped away from it, they'll go, well, he said how important this is, but it's not that important, is it? So you got to make decisions what it is in your organization that's going to do that. So we call this cross-lead now. And let's talk a little bit because there are some other pieces to it that I just want to throw out. This is my only Roman poet quote. But you should trust people who've been there. And trust yourself when you've been there. When you've been and done and seen something, think about it. Decide what it is it taught you. Give you a few that taught me. One was personal interactions. I interacted with a range of people, Afghan friends, media, young people, and then the one in the center. You go to a young Afghan who's lost both legs in combat, and all he asks for is help getting prosthetic legs so he can go back in combat for his country. What are you going to say to him? And yet your visit's extraordinarily important. Your interaction is extraordinarily important. We're all raised not to have big egos, and I don't think I do. But one time I'd been in the Army about 20 years. I like to write handwritten notes to people and thank them for what they've done. And we went to a home of a subordinate of mine and his wife, and I'd written his wife a handwritten note, thank her for what she's doing for the families. And it was framed. And now what I use as the litmus test, if someone deals with you and their interaction with you is going to cause them to go home that night and tell their spouse about it, then you're suddenly senior enough where everything you do matters. Every word you say to people, everything you do, because you touch people and it's memorable to them. Whether you're a good person or not, people say, when do I lead by example? I say every minute of every day, and it's going to be a good or bad example. Your interactions become extraordinarily important, even if you don't want them to be. But you think about if some great person came in here and got to meet you, you'd go home and tell your family about it. I met George Clooney. I met whoever it is. You would. And if they were a jerk to you, you'd go, I met Stan McChrystal, he's a jerk. And you'd tell 10 people and they'd tell 10 people. If you're in an organization, that gets out there. But the same applies if you do it well. Time and energy management. This is the Flynn brothers. both general officers now, they both worked for me for many years. And you run yourself into the ground. You run your people into the ground, and you're going to do that. Everybody tells me, okay, we're going to do life balance. I'm going to work 8-hour days, and then I'm going to spend time with my kids. I got it. Good luck. It's really hard to do. But here's what you got to do. I'm going to talk to you personally as leaders now. If you don't manage your own energy, you're not going to do very well. You're suddenly going to get to the point. When I get tired, I get cranky. I don't think well, and I get cranky. My staff always learned to do things with me up until about 8 at night. And then after 8 at night, they just gave me Goomba tasks, because they weren't going to get as good a response out of me. And that happens with a lot of us. You got to pace yourself and learn that you're a human being. And if you think you're not, you'll probably be mistaken. You're going to have to work up and out. Your role in an organization, at a certain point, the organization can do an awful lot internally with some help, and you're going to have to spend an awful lot of time up and out. And that's organizations you deal with, organizations you work for, customers. You're going to have to spend time, and you've got to learn how to do that. And you might not be naturally friends with all these people. You might not like them. When I went to Afghanistan in 2009, I had to form a relationship with President Karzai. Had to do it. It's my mission to do it. And I did that. And I spent hours and hours listening to him, and him listening to me. We're friends now. I was just, as I say, just over there a month ago visiting him. But you have to do that. It's relationships that matter, and that going up and out, it's contributing to your force. It's not burnishing you hanging out with great people. It's helping your organization because they need somebody to do that. We talked about leading by example. This is a British element in Helmand in Afghanistan in summer 2009. Had just gone into the difficult areas there. I'd gone in to see him. The guy on the left standing there had just lost his brother in Iraq a few months prior. And I'm telling him why this is important and what happens. You got to get out there and share whatever it is your organization goes through. If it's risk, you got to share it. If it's pain, you got to share it. Everything, if they don't feel that you're part of that, you lose them. And then inclusion. What does everybody hate? If I said, okay, this is a great thing, now I want the cool people to stay, 5 cool people to stay, and everybody else leave. Whether you wanted to be in here or not, you'd look around and see, am I one of the 5 cool people? And if you weren't, you'd walk out and you go, what are they talking about? And it's really damaging. Because organizations, if you don't think you're included in what's going on, you don't own success or failure. So how do you make everybody feel included and operate because of that? It's really critical. And then you're going to have crises. Every one of you are going to live through crises. Some will be personal crises, and some will be organizational. And they'll come and they won't always be expected, and sometimes they'll be your fault. And it's one thing if there's a bolt out of the blue and it just happens and you can kind of work through it. Other times you caused it. Now how are you going to deal with it? And everybody's going to look to you. What kind of presence do you give? What kind of reaction do you make when there's a crisis? The picture in the center, we had just killed more than 100 Afghan civilians. And I called President Karzai, told him about it, and then I flew up there to Kunduz. I went on the ground where it had happened. I went on TV and apologized to the Afghan people. Was that the right answer? I don't know. But it was everything I thought I could do right because it was an extraordinary crisis where the Afghan people were losing confidence in us. And you're going to deal with those, and you just got to get ready for them. And again, they always arrive when you are least prepared for them. Okay, last point before we go to questions, I just want to talk about veterans in the workforce. One thank for people of this. I am passionate about helping veterans get jobs. We got about a 13+% veteran unemployment rate right now, which is, of course, much higher than the national average. And it shouldn't be. These are people who've graduated from high school or college, and they've done extraordinary things. And people say, okay, we got a free market economy. These people have all been trained, they had a job. Why can't they go out and get a job? Well, there are lots of reasons for it. But the point is, it's really important that we think about this because whether we ever want to fight another war or not, if you want to fight one, you better take care of the people from the last war. because everybody's going to watch that. That's the cold-blooded business calculation. The other thing is it's the right thing to do. As they suffer, I think it's something we've got to think about. And we go, I spend a fair amount of time right now. I'm on the White House initiative to try to help service families and particularly veterans get jobs. So that is a paid political announcement or an unpaid political announcement. I just ask everybody to keep in your mind. Okay? I'll stop there and open it for whatever you'd like to talk about.